You see, life has a funny way of turning tables. Sometimes what looks like a setback for one nation becomes the spark for another. What looks like a mistake in one man's eyes turns into a miracle in another's. And that's exactly what happened when America made a move that the whole world thought was smart, but destiny had other plans. America's mistake became India's victory. Now, let me tell you something about how the world works. Every empire, every superpower, they all think they got the formula right. They think they can predict who's going to rise, who's going to fall, and who's going to stay in control. But you can't control destiny. You can't calculate passion. You can't measure hunger. See, while America was busy protecting its interests, India was busy building its dreams. While one side was focusing on power, the other side was focusing on purpose. And purpose always wins in the long run. India watched, India learned, India planned. While others were competing for headlines, India was competing with time. They invested in brains and innovation, in people who believed that hard work beats luck every single day. And here's the truth. Success doesn't come from copying what others do. Success comes from mastering what others overlook. America underestimated that. They thought power meant control. But India understood that power means independence, the kind that no one can take away from you. When you rise from the ground, nobody can tell you how high you can go. India took what the world ignored and turned it into gold. Every decision, every challenge, every so-called mistake from others became a lesson, a step, a push forward. America's mistake wasn't in its actions. It was in its assumptions. They assumed India would stay behind. They assumed the fire had gone out. But India's fire was just getting started. You see, sometimes God lets the mighty make mistakes so that the humble can rise. India rose not because it was given power, but because it created power. It turned rejection into motivation. It turned challenges into opportunities. And today, that same mistake that others made, that same underestimation, became the reason India stands strong, proud, and unstoppable. Because when you believe in your people, when you invest in your vision, when you refuse to quit, no mistake made by others can stop your victory. What was once America's mistake has now become India's moment. America's overconfidence opened doors for India's rise in ways the world never anticipated. When you think you're too far ahead, you stop looking back. You stop watching who's catching up. And that's exactly what happened when America believed its dominance was untouchable. It focused on maintaining control rather than adapting to change, while India quietly focused on growth, discipline, and vision. Overconfidence blinds even the most powerful. It makes you overlook the ones working in silence, the ones building foundations instead of headlines. America was so confident in its systems, its technology, its economy, that it failed to see a new power forming with patience and persistence. India played a long game. While others chased quick wins, India invested in education, technology, and youth. It saw opportunities in areas others ignored, in digital revolutions, in small startups, in global partnerships that didn't rely on dominance, but on collaboration. America's mistake wasn't aggression, it was assumption. The assumption that nobody could rise that fast, that nobody could match that scale, that nobody could rewrite the playbook. But India didn't just read the old rules, it wrote new ones. And every time America grew comfortable, India grew sharper. Every time the world looked west, India was building in the east. When a nation starts believing it's invincible, it loses touch with hunger. Hunger is what drives innovation, what pushes limits, what turns dreams into empires. America had the resources, but India had the reason. America had the stage, but India had the story. And that story came from generations who understood struggle, who knew how to make progress without privilege. America's overconfidence created space for new ideas, new voices, and a new kind of leadership that valued vision over validation. India didn't need to prove itself to anyone. It just needed to stay the course. The higher a nation rises without reflection, the harder it falls into complacency. And while America's overconfidence built walls, India's humility built bridges. India watched, learned, and waited for the moment when the world needed something fresh, something fearless. That moment came not because America fell, but because it forgot to look behind. And right there, in that gap between pride and perception, India found its path to rise. India transformed global challenges into opportunities by seeing what others called problems as possibilities. While powerful nations viewed economic instability, climate change, and technological disruption as threats, India saw them as open doors waiting to be walked through. It understood that growth doesn't come from comfort, it comes from chaos. Every global crisis forced India to adapt faster, think deeper, and act smarter. When others were busy defending their positions, India was busy redefining its direction. Challenges became the training ground for resilience, and every setback became a test that built strength for the future. India learned to navigate uncertainty with creativity. Limited resources didn't stop it from dreaming. They pushed it to innovate. Scarcity made India smarter, not smaller. It found ways to stretch every opportunity, every idea, every bit of potential until it became something powerful. When the world struggled with rising costs, India became the hub of affordable innovation. When others shut down industries, India opened new ones built on technology, youth, and vision. It realized that global problems don't crush you if you're willing to evolve. They shape you into something unstoppable. Instead of fearing globalization, India embraced it. It saw the world's interconnected nature not as a competition, but as a collaboration. The digital age became its battlefield and its blessing. From software to satellites, India took challenges that once intimidated developing nations and turned them into fields of mastery. Even during global recessions, it found growth through ingenuity and persistence. The willingness to learn from every difficulty rather than run from it became the foundation of its rise. What separated India from many others was mindset. While most nations reacted to change, India prepared for it. It didn't wait for the perfect conditions, it created them. It turned youth unemployment into a startup movement, energy crisis into renewable innovation, and political challenges into national unity. The more the world doubted its ability to handle pressure, the more India thrived under it. Every global challenge became a mirror that reflected India's courage and capacity to turn adversity into advancement. Because transformation isn't about avoiding struggle, it's about finding strength inside it, and India mastered that art through every challenge it faced. Power without purpose leads to downfall. Purpose builds nations. A nation can have all the technology, all the money, all the armies, but without a reason behind that power, it eventually loses direction. Power alone can make noise, but purpose creates progress. When a country builds its strength only to dominate others, that strength becomes fragile. But when it builds to uplift, to innovate, and to serve its people, that strength becomes unbreakable. India understood this difference early. It realized that lasting power doesn't come from control, it comes from contribution. While others were focused on maintaining their dominance, India was focused on defining its purpose. Purpose gives power meaning. It shapes how you use what you have. America and other superpowers spent decades chasing influence, but India spent those same decades chasing impact. It invested in education not just to compete, but to empower. It built industries not just for profit, but for progress. When the rest of the world raced for power, India searched for purpose, and that made all the difference. Because when purpose drives power, every achievement becomes sustainable, every success becomes meaningful, and every advancement touches lives. The world often confuses power with leadership, but real leadership comes from vision. Power can be taken, but purpose can only be lived. India didn't need to overpower anyone to prove itself. It needed to stand for something greater than itself. Its growth was rooted in a belief that success means lifting others along the way. Whether through technology, medicine, or education, India's purpose became its power. That's why even when it wasn't the richest or strongest, it kept rising. The foundation was deeper than economics. It was moral, cultural, and human. Nations built on power alone rise fast, but fall faster. Nations built on purpose rise steadily and stay strong. India's rise wasn't about outshining others. It was about outlasting them through meaning and mission. It learned that true power lies in unity, not superiority. While others flaunted dominance, India practiced discipline. While others showed might, India showed mindset. And that mindset, grounded in purpose, became the real reason it continues to grow while others struggle to sustain what they built without direction. Underestimation became India's greatest advantage because when the world doesn't expect much from you, you're free to surprise everyone. There's power in being overlooked. When people stop paying attention, you can move in silence, build in peace, and grow without pressure. Many powerful nations underestimated India, believing it would always remain behind in the global race, limited by its struggles and history. But that underestimation became the shield that protected India's progress. While others were busy competing for attention, India was busy preparing for transformation. It didn't need validation from the world. It needed conviction from within. Being underestimated removes the weight of expectation. It allows you to experiment, to fail quietly, and to rise without noise. India understood that being ignored was not an insult, but an opportunity. Every nation that underestimated India unknowingly gave it room to evolve. The lack of spotlight gave it freedom to innovate without interference. It could develop its industries, strengthen its technology sector, and nurture its youth without being seen as a threat. And when the time came, the results spoke louder than any prediction or policy ever could. There's a kind of strength that comes from being doubted. When people say you can't, and you choose to show that you can, that's where greatness is born. India turned global skepticism into motivation. Every dismissive headline, every doubting voice became fuel for its fire. Instead of getting defensive, India got determined. It didn't argue with the world, it outperformed it. Progress became the answer to every insult, innovation became the response to every doubt, and success became the silence breaker. The beauty of underestimation is that it forces humility while fueling hunger. India didn't rise through arrogance, it rose through effort. It proved that quiet confidence beats loud claims every time. While others flaunted achievements, India built foundations. While others focused on image, India focused on improvement. And as the world began to notice, it was already too late to stop the momentum. Underestimation gave India time to build its strength, polish its skills, and define its vision away from the noise. What others saw as weakness was actually preparation, and what they ignored became the very force that changed the balance of power. True strength lies in innovation, education, and resilience, because these are the roots that hold a nation steady when everything else changes. Power built on weapons fades, but power built on wisdom lasts for generations. India understood that if it wanted to rise, it had to educate its people, not just militarize them. It had to innovate beyond imitation, create beyond copying, and build a culture where learning never stops. Every great society has been built on ideas, not intimidation. India's vision was to transform its human potential into its greatest natural resource, and that decision became the cornerstone of its progress. Innovation became India's heartbeat. It didn't just copy global technology, it reimagined it for its own people. From affordable medicine to space exploration on minimal budgets, India showed that creativity can defeat even the most expensive systems. It was never about having the most money, it was about having the most imagination. When faced with problems, India didn't wait for rescue, it built solutions. It created startups out of struggle, industries out of necessity, and technology out of pure determination. Innovation became not just a word, but a way of survival, a habit deeply rooted in the nation's character. Education was the foundation that fueled this innovation. When the rest of the world saw its population as a burden, India saw it as a blessing. Every young mind became a possibility, every classroom a battlefield of ideas. It wasn't just about degrees or ranks, it was about awakening a generation that could think, question, and create. The engineers, doctors, scientists, and entrepreneurs who emerged became ambassadors of a new India, one that believed knowledge is the real wealth that no one can steal. Through education, India empowered its citizens to become contributors, not dependents, to global progress. Resilience was the force that tied it all together. Innovation gives direction. Education gives capability, but resilience gives endurance. India's history taught it how to endure storms and still keep moving. It faced economic challenges, social barriers, and political setbacks, yet every time it fell, it got back stronger. That resilience became its identity, the unshakable belief that no matter how tough the world gets, it will always find a way. True strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about always rebuilding, smarter and stronger each time. What others saw as failure, India turned into victory through a mindset that refused to accept defeat as the end. Every time the world pointed at India's struggles, poverty, population, politics, it was planting seeds that India would later turn into solutions. The power to transform failure lies in perspective, and India mastered that art over time. Instead of letting failure define it, India let failure refine it. It looked at every shortcoming as a lesson, every obstacle as an opportunity to prove that progress doesn't come from perfection, it comes from persistence. Nations that collapse under failure are those that fear it. But India learned to face it head on and rise above it when global economies doubted India's capability. It didn't retreat, it rebuilt. When industries collapsed, it found new paths. When others mocked its slow pace, it used that same pace to plan its sustainability. The world measured success in speed, but India measured it in strength. It realized that even small progress, when consistent, becomes unstoppable. What looked like failure to outsiders was actually preparation from within. The challenges India faced weren't curses, they were catalysts. Each one pushed it closer to self. Reliance and innovation, what others gave up on, India kept working on until it became impossible to ignore. There's something powerful about a nation that knows how to rise from disappointment. Failure tests character. And India's character was built through centuries of learning how to start again. It learned to turn rejection into redirection, crisis into creativity, and limitations into leadership. While others focused on what went wrong, India focused on what could still be done. It never waited for perfect conditions. It built progress out of imperfection. That resilience turned losses into lessons that fueled its rise in technology, education, and global diplomacy. The greatest victories often come disguised as failures, and India's story is proof of that truth. Each setback revealed a new strength. Each criticism revealed a new capability. Where others saw impossibility, India saw innovation. It didn't matter how many times it stumbled. What mattered was that it never stopped moving. That unyielding will, that refusal to surrender, transformed every fall into a foundation for growth. What others called India's failure was simply the beginning of its transformation into a nation defined not by what it lost, but by how it kept rising through every challenge